The Easter brunch at my parents' house had a script, the same one every year, and I had memorized every line of it long before I stopped expecting to have any lines of my own. I arrived at noon with a bowl of macaroni salad I'd made the night before, the kind with yellow mustard and dill pickles my mother used to make when we were kids. My brother Curtis arrived 12 minutes later in a navy blazer, his wife Shelby carrying an arrangement of white tulips and a bottle of Sonoma-Cutrer that my mother immediately declared too nice to open before dinner. The way my mother's voice changed when Curtis walked in. Softer, lifted, like someone had turned a dimmer switch up 3 notches. Was something I had stopped noticing the way you stop noticing the sound of the refrigerator. It was just the ambient noise of being in my family. There were 15 people around the table that day. My parents' dining room cannot comfortably seat 15 people, which meant folding chairs from the garage and the leaf extension that always wobbled slightly on the left side. My father Frank sat at the head of the table. My mother Linda moved between the kitchen and the dining room like she was conducting something, which she was. Aunt Patrice and Uncle Vince had driven up from Charlotte. My cousins were scattered across the folding chairs. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who everyone calls Grandma Dot, sat at the corner of the table nearest the window, the way she always does, eating slowly and watching everything the way she has since before I was born. I was helping pass the rolls when my mother tapped her glass. She did this when she had something she wanted everyone to hear. I recognized the gesture. I set down the bread basket and waited. "I want to share something," she said, and her voice had the particular brightness it gets when she's been rehearsing. "Curtis got his acceptance letter this week." She paused for effect. "To the Hartwell MBA program." The table reacted the way it always reacted to news about Curtis. Aunt Patrice made a sound. Uncle Vince said, "There he is." My cousins offered the kind of congratulations that are mostly about volume. Shelby squeezed Curtis's arm with a smile that looked genuinely proud, and I thought, good. She should be. He worked hard for this. My father reached across and clapped Curtis once on the shoulder, the way he has since Curtis made varsity baseball in 1997, and Curtis looked exactly the same as he did at 17, pleased and slightly embarrassed and trying not to look like either. Hartwell University's MBA program has a 9% acceptance rate. I know this because I have the admissions data for every graduate program on our campus going back 11 years. I know this because I have sat in the committee meetings where that acceptance rate was deliberated and defended. I know this because I am the director of graduate admissions at Hartwell University and have been for 7 years, and the MBA program that just accepted my brother is one I helped redesign from the ground up in 2021. None of my family knew any of this. What they knew, what they had decided they knew, sometime around my late 20s, when I stopped trying to explain the difference between what I actually did and what they imagined, was that I worked at a school. "She's in education," my mother would say, with a tone that placed education somewhere between respectable and unremarkable, the way you'd describe someone who had chosen a perfectly fine life without any particular ambition. When people asked follow-up questions, she would say, "She works with the school district," or "She does something with admissions, I think," and then redirect the conversation toward Curtis. She was not lying exactly. She just had never asked. Not once in 7 years, not the year I was promoted, not the year I presented at the National Association for College Admission Counseling Conference, not when my name appeared in a state higher education journal. She had the broad outline. I worked in education, I lived 40 minutes away, I came home for holidays, and she had filled in everything else herself. And what she had filled in was small. I had tried to tell her once, maybe 4 years ago. I brought a copy of our graduate school view book to Thanksgiving because I thought she might like to see it, and I started to explain what I did, and she said, "That sounds like a lot of paperwork," and turned to ask Curtis whether he was still thinking about the MBA. That was the last time I brought anything from work to my parents' house. I kept showing up. I kept making the macaroni salad. I just stopped expecting anyone to ask what I did all week. The brunch conversation moved on from Curtis's acceptance. My mother served the ham, my father carved. At some point, my cousin Connor, who was in his 2nd year at community college, mentioned he was thinking about transferring. And that led to a general discussion about applications and essays and how competitive everything had gotten. And this is when my father looked at me with the expression he wears when he is trying to be kind and does not realize he is doing the opposite. You know, he said, addressing the table as much as me, Hartwell has a continuing education program. Night classes, weekend courses, you could pick up a certificate, something in business administration or project management. Get a credential. He reached over to the stack of papers on the side table, the one my mother uses for mail and coupons and things she means to deal with later, and he produced, with the confidence of someone presenting a gift, a single printed sheet. He held it out to me across the table. I pulled this up last week, thought of you, might open some doors. He was offering me a Hartwell University continuing education course brochure. At his Easter table, in front of 15 relatives. For the university where I had worked for 7 years. My cousin Connor made a small sound he quickly turned into a cough. Aunt Patrice was looking at the centerpiece. Shelby had gone very still beside Curtis. I took the brochure from my father's hand. I looked at it. I set it on the table next to my fork, the same way I set down anything I intend to come back to in a meeting, and I did not react. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, I was feeling quite a lot, but because I had learned in 33 years that my family interpreted my reactions as invitations to revise the narrative. If I laughed, I was taking it well. If I argued, I was being defensive. Silence was the one response that never gave them anything to work with, and silence was what I had trained myself to give, the way you train yourself to breathe through certain kinds of pain. What nobody at that table knew was that I had personally recused myself from my brother's MBA application, the moment his name appeared in the applicant pool 6 months ago. I had walked into my supervisor's office and disclosed the relationship, and Curtis's file was transferred to a separate review committee with no involvement from me. That is the rule. I followed it precisely, not because I didn't want to help my brother, but because the integrity of the process is the only reason an acceptance means anything at all. Curtis earned his way in. I made certain of that. That, too, was something none of my family knew. They didn't know I'd been given the chance to influence the outcome and had stepped back deliberately. They didn't know, because they didn't know I was there in the first place. I was still looking at the brochure when Grandma Dot set down her fork. She does this the way she does everything, deliberately, without hurry. The small click of silverware against her plate was quiet enough that only the people nearest to her would have heard it. But something about the deliberateness of it made the whole end of the table go still. She looked at my father, not at me, at my father. "Frank," she said, in a voice that has approximately 2 settings, pleasant and done, and she was using the second one. "Do you know what Hartwell University actually is?" My father blinked. It's the private school up on the ridge. Good school." "Do you know what your daughter does there?" The table had gone quiet in the particular way that happens when everyone can feel something shifting, but nobody knows which direction it's going. My father looked at me. My mother looked at me. Both wore the same expression. People who realize they are about to be asked a question they cannot answer. "She does admissions," my mother said carefully, like she was stepping onto ice she wasn't sure would hold. "She's in admissions." Grandma Dot tilted her head slightly. "Admissions where? What's her title?" My mother's mouth moved once without sound. I looked at the continuing education brochure beside my fork. I looked at my father's face, still caught somewhere between confusion and genuine concern. I had spent 33 years being the version of myself my family had decided to know. I had spent 7 years at a job I was good at, doing work I was proud of, and not once had anyone in that room asked what that work actually looked like. Not once had anyone asked what a good week felt like, what a hard decision cost, what it meant to be responsible for which students got a chance and which ones didn't. I had been the macaroni salad and the quiet one at the end of the table, not because that was who I was, but because it was easier than fighting to be seen every single holiday for the rest of my life. I picked up the brochure and set it back in the center of the table where everyone could see it. "I'm the director of graduate admissions at Hartwell University," I said. I use the same voice I use in faculty senate meetings, when I need 47 people to actually absorb what I'm saying. I've been there 7 years. I oversee admissions for 19 graduate programs, including the MBA program that Curtis just got accepted into. The table absorbed this, the way tables absorb things that rearrange them. "I recused myself from Curtis's application the moment I saw his name in the pool," I continued, because I needed that said clearly. He got in on his own. I made certain of that. "But the brochure you just handed me, Dad, I helped write the copy for that brochure. I sat on the committee that approved the tuition structure for those courses. I know the director of continuing education personally. We've had lunch. My father's hand, the one that had offered me the brochure with such uncomplicated goodwill, was resting flat on the tablecloth. He was looking at the centerpiece tulips like they had just said something to him. My mother said, "I didn't know the program was." "You didn't ask," I said, and my voice stayed level. Not when I was promoted to director. Not when I mentioned I'd been there 5 years. Not at any Thanksgiving or Easter or Christmas in 7 years. I tried to explain it once, and you said it sounded like a lot of paperwork. I paused. I stopped bringing it up after that. Shelby spoke first, across the table, with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not embarrassed, not defensive, just honest. I had no idea. "Curtis talks about the Hartwell program constantly. We've been sitting at this table for years, and I never—" "I know," I said. "I know you didn't." Uncle Vince let out a long breath and looked at the ceiling. Aunt Patrice had both hands pressed to her mouth. Connor was looking at me like he was recalculating something. My father finally looked up from the tulips. His voice, when it came, had a crack in it I had not heard before. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a person who has just understood something they don't know how to undo. "The brochure," he said. "I just thought." He didn't finish. I don't think he knew how to. I picked it up, I folded it once, the way I fold documents I'm done with. I handed it back across the table. "You meant well," I said. "I know that. But I don't need it." Grandma Dot reached over and put her hand on mine. Her hand is small and warm and has not changed since I was 8 years old, which is something I always notice and never say out loud. "I've known for 4 years," she said to the whole table, not just me. "She told me when she got promoted. I told her you'd all come around eventually." She looked at my mother, steady and unimpressed. I may have been optimistic. My mother's face did something complicated. The hostess brightness dropped out of it, the careful, managed warmth, and what was underneath was something older and less composed. She looked at me for a long moment, and then quietly, in a voice stripped of its usual performance, she said, "I'm sorry, Rachel. I should have asked." It was not a speech. It was not a grand reckoning. It was 4 words and a name, and the name was the right one. And for right now, that was the most honest thing she had said to me at that table, in longer than I could accurately count, and I let it land the way it was meant. Curtis caught me by the front door on the way out, while Shelby was getting her jacket from the coat closet. He looked at me the way he used to when we were kids, and he'd broken something and was trying to figure out how bad it was. "I should have asked," he said. "I didn't ask, Rach, for years. I didn't ask." "No," I said, "but you can now." He nodded once. The kind of nod that means something beyond agreement. I believed him. Not because families repair themselves cleanly, or because one conversation rewrites decades of looking the other way, but because he was standing there looking like someone who had genuinely not understood until today, and I didn't have it in me to be hard about that. Understanding is a beginning. It isn't the same as forgiveness, and it isn't the same as change, but it is somewhere to start from, and I would take it. I drove home with the windows down because it was April, and the air still had that particular coolness that April carries before everything warms up for good. I thought about the brochure. I thought about my father's face when he held it across the table. All that uncomplicated goodwill wrapped around an assumption that had been sitting in my family's understanding of me for years, without anyone ever checking whether it was true. He had looked it up. He had printed it out. He had thought of me. And somehow that was the part that had taken the longest to swallow. Not the carelessness, but the care that had lived inside it. Care that had never once thought to ask a single real question first. I don't know if Easter next year will look different. I don't know if my mother will introduce me correctly the next time we're in a room full of people, or if my father will find another way to offer me something I already have. What I know is that I sat at that table today, and I told the truth about who I am, and I didn't apologize for the years I'd spent being quiet, because silence had been the only way I knew how to survive a room that wasn't listening. They were listening now. What they chose to do with that was up to them. I got home and put the rest of the macaroni salad in the refrigerator and stood in my kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular. Outside it was still light. The whole drive I'd been waiting to feel something arrive. Relief or satisfaction or something clean, but what settled in was quieter than any of that. Just the ordinary feeling of having finally taken up the space I had always been entitled to, and finding that it fit. It was the best Easter I'd had in years. Not because it went the way I'd hoped, because for once it went real.